Welcome to Liberty Law Talk, part of Liberty Fund's online library of law and liberty. Your host is Liberty Fund Fellow Richard Reinsch. Our website is libertylawtalk.org, where you can subscribe, comment, find other episodes and links relevant to today's conversation. Our email address is mail@libertylawtalk.org. We'd love to hear from you. Today we are discussing with Gordon Lloyd his new book, co-authored with David Davenport, The New Deal in Modern American Conservatism, A Defining Rivalry. Gordon Lloyd is a professor of public policy at the School of Public Policy at Pepperdine University. He also has edited The Two Faces of American Liberalism, and most recently, with Nicholas Capaldi, The Two Narratives of Political Economy. I also want to mention that he has created 4 websites devoted to the teaching of the American founding. I'll mention one of those websites because I use it so frequently, and I know it's been of such value to many others around the country, teachingamericanhistory.org. Gordon, glad to have you on the program.
Thank you.
So I want to jump in here right into your main argument in the New Deal in modern American conservatism. Why is the New Deal, to take on this argument, the centerpiece of change in American political life institutions? Why is it the centerpiece that all parts of conservatism must repudiate in a convincing philosophical fashion?
Well, I think that that any public policy student today, for example, needs to ask the question, what should government do? Which level of government should do it? And which branch of which level government should do it? And linked to all of that is, what should government do? And I think the New Deal answers those questions by saying that government is a friend of the people. It is an agent of the people. It's the people's government. And that we have, I think that is a fundamental change. Now, there have been moments in which the government has entered the lives of people in emergency and war and civil war, and in terms of trying to expand the infrastructure between 1787 and 1932. That's all gone on, and there have been attempts to regulate and extend. But I think there's a fundamental change in the 1932 election, and that is a transformation of the role of government, so that the questions which I just asked, which I think public policy people should ask, what is the role of government, which level should do it, and which branch of which government should do it, become irrelevant. And that, so the questions which I'm encouraging people to ask are conservative questions. That is, it's a reaction to something that has developed. And at Roosevelt's Commonwealth Club speech in the 1932 campaign, in effect says that America is a changed country. We cannot any longer rely on the sort of questions which I've just raised. Enlightened administration has replaced entrepreneurial action, as well as the separation of powers, the checks and balances, etc. So we're in a new age, a new era, a new way. So we don't have to ask those 3 questions anymore. And so what I'm saying is that those 3 questions need to be still asked, so that the defining rivalry is that the New Deal says those 3 questions are no longer important, and the conservatives ought to be asking those 3 questions.
I take it as well, if we think deeply about the New Deal reforms and the New Deal revolution in government, the most important branch of government is no longer the deliberative branch, that is the congressional branch, it's the executive branch, which
That's
becomes
correct.
The all-consuming power, the administrator, not
correct.
just of government, but potentially of all aspects of American life. There really are no principled limits to what it can and to what it should do. It's, what can it not do, I guess, is, there's so much that it can do. Thinking about that, though, and also this sort of change, the centerpiece of conservatism that it must oppose is New Deal, you argue. And so how might it do that? And I think that's a huge part of your book. Sketch for us, though, why, because it's interesting in the book, you think Herbert Hoover, you argue, he is a crucial part of this opposition. And that struck me, and I think it will strike a lot of readers as odd or funny, if not wrong, given what a lot of people have said about Hoover, particularly the strength of Amity Shlaes' book. She's looking to Coolidge, not to Hoover, to find that sort of statesman-like answer to the New Deal. And so maybe the simple question I'd ask is, why Hoover?
Well, that could take us for the whole the rest of this podcast, and it's
so maybe just a sketch for us would be.
No. I mean, I'm complimenting you. Okay. I'm complimenting you. I'm not criticizing. I'm complimenting. I mean, we could just spend hours on that question, but let me sort of respond in the following way.
Here's maybe the simple question that can get us into this particular discussion. Why are people like Amity Shlaes wrong, in your opinion, to articulate this sort of view of Hoover as a precursor to the New Deal and as saying as a progressive Republican? Maybe that's how we can start.
No. I think I like her work. I've never met her, and I'm eager to have a conversation with her. By the way, her blurb on the back of Nash's book, where he discovers this memoir that Hoover was working on privately and never published, and George Nash discovered it. Shlaes' blurb is actually a confirmation of what David Davenport and I have discovered in Hoover. So I'd be very eager to chat with Amity about how she changed her mind about Hoover, given the evidence from George Nash's book, which David and I didn't have access to. What we wrote was based on Hoover's actual publication. I don't think there's anything. The beauty of George Nash's book is that it contains everything under one cover. But I think what it does is to confirm the variety of publications and statements that Hoover has made. It's almost like he's sitting back and working on it, and George has discovered this, and Hoover for some reason didn't publish it. All right, here's the heart of the question. If conservatism is a reaction to something going on, because conservatives, I mean, the whole word is to conserve something against something, all right? Now, one would hope that a sensible conservative is going to be able to make the distinction between, well, that's your crisis, this is a passing fancy, over against something which is fundamentally challenging to the regime. And so my problem with those folks, and it's not just Amity, it's my friends at Claremont. There's others in the conservative movement who see Coolidge. It's almost like Coolidge is pure because he hasn't been touched by this infection of progressivism that manifests itself in FDR. So we go back to innocence, or we go back to sort of original, free from this infection. Now that's all well and good, but Coolidge died before the New Deal really got going. So why would we want? So the first premise is: is the New Deal a fundamental shift in American politics? If the New Deal is not a fundamental shift in American politics, it seems to me that Coolidge versus Hoover makes a lot of sense. The Shlaes Claremont Institute makes a lot of sense. If the New Deal is a fundamental shift in American politics, Coolidge is not that relevant. It's the question of how do you respond to the New Deal? What is Coolidge responding to? He's going through a period where America is. I don't want to diminish Coolidge. But what I want to do is to establish, does the New Deal make a fundamental difference in the nature and character and the institutions of American politics? The book that David and I wrote is yes. If that is the case, how can Coolidge help us to respond to that, since conservatism in its most sensible sense is a response to something fundamental? Hoover in the 1920s did, as Schley's is completely correct, and others are, I think, completely correct. Hoover tried to tame progressivism. I mean, you get the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th Amendment passed by progressives, and then you get Woodrow Wilson, and then you get a break. So part of the question is, what is the role of conservatism in the 1920s? And I think the answer is you try to tame it, and I did. The event of the Great Depression changed that, is the thesis of the book, and that Hoover himself changed, so that you get a fundamental change in the meaning of conservatism from we will try to tame to now we're going to fight.
So you've got two parts in Hoover's
You got two parts.
Political
exactly.
career.
You got two. Yes.
I like your point about Coolidge. I've had similar thoughts myself. And perhaps the most, he confronts increasing calls for government spending, government pensions during his presidency, most of which he repudiates. Clearly, there are national emergencies that he does not respond to. But this is before we've really had it was not before, but we don't yet have the sort of demands on the federal treasury that Hoover will see. And not just demands, but I like the philosophical change in thinking that starts to emerge. Although I think Schley's might counter, this is even evident, something like this is evident when he is the governor of Massachusetts, and has to confront the Boston police strike, and really repudiates it thoroughly and without regard really to the political consequences. But he actually boosts his career. So I think there's a lot to be said for your argument.
You know what? Look, we could all go. Everybody else but you and me, Richard, have low grounds in life, and we've got all kinds of skeletons in the closet, but you don't and I don't. So that if people on the outside want to discover some contradiction or some kind of hypocrisy or some kind of such they'll find it. And part of modern scholarship, which has been infected by the progressives, including our conservative friends, want to look for a contradiction or want to look for some kind of lack of consistency. That you know what? That's fine, but I don't think that is the real issue. To me, the issue, to David and me, the issue is the New Deal a benchmark? If you look back over the last 3 centuries, can you identify certain fundamental objective? I don't know how you measure objective, but the founding is one. There's a huge debate. Someone won, someone lost, and it changed the nature of the conversation. Now, the Anti-Federalists haven't gone away, in part thanks to you inviting me to keep them alive in this conversation. Then you got the Civil War, and you've got Lincoln, Douglas, and you've got Tawney. You've got all kinds of interpretations in which the first crisis is involved in it. And then you've got. And here we go. And here we get to the 20th century with the Depression and FDR and Hoover. I can tell you before I started all this work, I could summarize Hoover's position in half a page, and it was he was a do-nothing, laissez-faire, rampant Darwinian, Spencerian individualist who had no understanding of what went on. And so it's a monolithic understanding. And what David and I have tried to do is to recover a conversation. Now, what Schley's is doing, it seems to me, and I'd love to have a conversation with her about this, is that the New Deal is not really philosophically the critical change in America that David and I are making it. That Hoover, in fact, through budgets, Hoover, in fact, through meddling, Hoover, in fact, through the commerce, etc., set the groundwork, set the floor for Roosevelt simply to come in. So that Hoover, in fact, was the problem. But it's not somehow that the New Deal was a catastrophic change, except that when you read Schley's blurb on George Nash's book, you begin to think that maybe she has reconsidered. So I think that's a huge conversation that needs to be done. And to summarize, what difference does the New Deal make? On the left wing, there are people who think the New Deal didn't do a darn thing. It missed the opportunity for true socialism. So that there's this, and no doubt. I mean, what did the Civil War settle? You got people on both sides. Nothing. Does war settle anything? Well, we had to do this. And then the founding. Well, what is it? Is it just simply a continuation of Britain, or is it something brand new? And where does the French Revolution fit into this? So I'm not surprised that we're having an argument or a discussion about where Hoover fits into this, because he has been, the interesting thing is he's been demeaned as a know-nothing, as a do-nothing president by the left in order to establish Roosevelt, the progressives, as not just an era, but as a philosophy. And now the libertarian right are discovering that Hoover actually considered the role of government in a serious fashion and had bigger budgets than Coolidge and had bigger aspirations than Coolidge. And so really, Coolidge makes sense to certain conservatives because he is free, he's pure, he's innocent of all of this discussion. But what that does is, my challenge to that argument is, so therefore the New Deal really isn't a fundamental alteration in American politics. And to the extent that it is it's just an electoral strategy which then which joins together certain component parts which set the stage for the future. I mean, it's not a philosophical change. In other words, it's a denial of what both Roosevelt and Hoover claimed. Roosevelt claimed this is a transformation of America. We can date America from March 1933, almost like the French Revolution. Year 1, year 2, year 3. And Hoover almost agrees. The challenge to liberty is that when Roosevelt came in March 1933, a transformation of America took place. So my answer to your question, which is unfortunately a very long answer, is that somehow people have got it in their mind that the New Deal is not a transformative, fundamentally transformative, but it's a difference in degree rather than a difference in kind. And that's why Hoover seems to be a stepping stone, because it's simply a difference in degree. I think it's a difference in kind. And to see the difference in kind, you have to see Hoover responding as a conservative to the New Deal.
I want to pick up on the second part of Hoover that we mentioned earlier, the second part of his political career. You say he has something like an Edmund Burke moment, and what you mean by that is Edmund Burke's realization of what the French Revolution meant, but could also mean for the rest of Europe and most notably for his country, and he sets himself squarely in opposition to it. Hoover, you say, has the similar realization, and this gets also into the problem that always dogs conservatism. Libertarians always point this out, and you've mentioned it. What is it about? What are you trying to conserve? And Hoover gives an answer there, you say. It's an American system of liberty that he sets in opposition to the New Deal. Sketch that out for us, maybe, because I think that'll help us understand also why Hoover is so central to your case.
Well, one answer is I'm trying to pay, David and I are trying to pay attention to the legitimate claim that Edmund Burke is somehow acknowledged through Russell Kirk and others as somehow the founder of modern conservatism, and Burke is part of that. Part of that argument, and that the French Revolution and Burke's response to the French Revolution is defining, and that the French Revolution just discarded the past without knowing where it was going in the future, and Burke warned of the danger. So answer number one is that the Burkean moment is where you no longer try to contain and be prudent and sensible and cut and paste and whatever, but there's something fundamental going on where you've got to argue against it. And so what we're trying to do in the book is to suggest that the New Deal is that sort of the American equivalent of the French Revolution. That is the quote Burkean moment where conservatism changes from taming to fighting.
This also entails, and you note this in passing, I think, conservatives in America really see themselves as a post-war movement phenomenon.
That's correct.
The major books, we've mentioned one, Russell Kirk.
Yes.
Also, F.A. Hayek, Not an American, but Not Ideas Have Consequences. The Road to Serfdom, and then Ideas Have Consequences by Richard Weaver. Other Austrian economics plays into this movement as well.
Yes.
Your book would say, no, that's actually a late reaction. The key is Herbert Hoover, the election of 1932, and then a lot of his subsequent addresses where he has this Burkean moment. I thought that was interesting, and
all right. No. To continue this, I mean, can people go through life and say, darn it, the country is not the way it used to be, and what I would consider to be a taming moment now becomes sort of like a catastrophic moment. We see that in our own lives. Why can't has Hoover been consistent? Why is consistency the key thing? I mean, the key thing is that Hoover reacted in the 1920s as a restrainer of progressivism, and it was sort of successful. Hoover in the 1930s is not acting as a restrainer. He's saying this is on the road to changing the American system into something European, which then permits him. He did not see the American system particularly in danger from within in the 1920s. He saw the American system as danger from within with the New Deal. That he saw that and that, I think, is part of the birth of modern American conservatism. That this concern with what is American and what is not American. Now, the fact that Hoover did not persuade the 1932 electorate or the 1936 electorate is important, and it raises the next question: why is progressivism so attractive?
Yes. Yeah.
And which can get us into a whole bunch of another sort of avenue.
No, and I do want us to go there because I think there are a lot of interesting facts to think about.
Well, have I answered your question?
Yeah, I think it's important to consider Hoover, and you see this in Coolidge as well. That there's an American liberty. And,
yeah, exactly.
And this is something that I think is also worth having in the conversation in contemporary conservative circles. That liberty is. It's not just moral. It's not just economic, but it's a spiritual quality tied to the individual. To the uniqueness of being a human person, and Hoover emphasizes this, and Nash also emphasizes this part of Hoover, and so I think that's worth thinking about.
Yeah, well, there are two things that you've just mentioned which are very important. The first is liberty, and the second is American. And that my quarrel, to the extent that I have a quarrel with certain conservatives, is that they see America as part of a longer story of Western civilization. And I think that misses the point that about what is American about American conservatism. That conservatism is not just simply American conservatism is not simply conserving the past. I mean, in my mind, American conservatism does not want to conserve monarchy. It does not want to conserve feudalism. It doesn't want to conserve primogeniture. It wasn't conserve all of that. There's something else going on within American conservatism, which is American. And Philadelphia is not just simply a stepping stone on the way of Western civilization. So when we're talking about defending the American constitutionalism, we're not just defending due process from Magna Carta. We're defending something which is unique. And I think Hoover is part of that. That he reminds us with Coolidge that there's something American about American conservatism. So that conservatism is not simply in America is not simply conserving Sparta, for goodness sake, or conserving medieval values. There's something about liberty and the constraint on arbitrary, unreasonable government over individual people's lives, and that it is Europe which is the danger. And the 1920s and the 1930s, first Coolidge and then Hoover recognized. Well, certainly, Hoover wrote a piece which, if I had to do all of this over again, I would recover Hoover's American Individualism, which he wrote in 1922, and in which he outlines the various alternative systems of government. And he says America is unique. That's where, he really emphasizes the exceptionalism of America and the beauty of America. And that part of the beauty of America is to be able to adapt without losing its core. So that the fact that Hoover wasn't able to explain that in the 1930s, he was not able to persuade the electorate in the 1930s, suggests that he lost control of the argument, and that something fundamental was going on, which gets me back to the notion of the New Deal is something fundamentally altering, which shifts the American people from sort of like, let's say, a center-right country that is willing to tame and willing to entertain, but to a center-left country. How does that happen? And the answer is some depression or some big, huge moment when get your people to, and which the center-right argument doesn't work. But it was there. But he didn't persuade people through the elections. Now, I would say that it is true. It is true that when you get to the 1950s, you get the birth of the National Review, and you get the Mont Pelerin Society, and you get this fusion, as Frank Meyer would put it. And the fusion is between your traditional conservatives, which Hoover was not fundamentally a traditional conservative, and he was not fundamentally a libertarian, which is why I see Schle's disagree. But he was a fusionist of an early kind, and I think that Meyer thesis of fusion, which comes out in the 1950s and the birth of the Philadelphia Society, etc., is very, very important. And I think what happened is that World War II delayed that.
That's interesting. What do you think about something you mentioned, losing control of the conversation? And we can easily say that it's the fundamental act of the dramatic loss of wealth and high unemployment worked its own ruin and creates tremendous unease within the population, and they start to look for some sort of solution, some sort of philosophical way to understand this problem, and progressivism has that to offer. But just backing up, the 1920s had been a period of tremendous economic growth.
Yes.
Progressives said it was kind of false growth, or it wasn't real, and it was something that was soaked up by the wealthy, and it wasn't broadly shared. We know that narrative. But you can look at the statistics. And just in terms of middle class standards of living increased dramatically. Things like indoor plumbing, electricity, all these sorts of things become common or more widespread. So we have that period. We have the great event, the stock market crash, the unemployment, and voila, there's progressivism to emerge. And I guess my question that I keep thinking, is there not something uniquely American possibly about the New Deal? And what I mean here, and I know you'll disagree, there's something about the innovation of capitalism, the innovation in the private sphere, and we're constantly reinventing ourselves, making ourselves new. We're moving to new parts of the country. We marry people that we didn't grow up with. I mean, there's all this sorts of dynamism in American life. And then the thought becomes, and it's not an inevitable thought, why can't we do the same in government to make our lives better using the techniques of government? And so that's my question. Isn't there something about the pragmatism within American life that makes the New Deal and the processes of government that it introduces amenable, acceptable?
Well, that's a very good question. One could make the argument that the New Deal is tamed Hamiltonianism, that it's Hamiltonianism in the 20th century, that Hamilton would recognize it and would be, and the alteration is that somehow it's not aristocratic or democratic. Aristocratic or monarchical, so we've tamed Hamilton, so it's recognizable. Okay. One might make the argument that, look, we've been in America so long with the American system, Clay, the internal improvements. Isn't this just another version of that? So I understand the argument about American pragmatism, and there's a lot of folks, both on the left and the right, who do not see any coherence to the New Deal. And in fact, Hoover is willing to entertain. Look, there are a couple of arguments here. One is that they're just trying whatever they can and trying to get away with, and they're just doing something in a pragmatic fashion. So, I mean, he's willing to entertain that argument, and it was very widespread, both on the left and the right. There was no coherence. I think Hoover's also willing to entertain, and Roosevelt is more than willing to entertain. And this is a fundamental transformation. And that the fundamental transformation is that Hamilton is dead, that Jefferson is dead. The world belongs to the living, and we are the living, and it is up to us to create. The Constitution is a living Constitution. The Declaration is a living declaration. What do we want the Declaration to mean? The Declaration will mean what we want it to be. And the Constitution, all those clauses and articles and whatnot, have to take their guidance from three words. The three most important words in the Constitution are "we the people." Foremost, we the people, and the expression of "we the people" is through elections, but not congressional elections, but through presidential elections every 4 years. It's during this time that we get this odd emergence of something called midterm elections or off-year elections.
Off-year, yes.
Right? I mean, it's almost like what I think the progressives are doing, and particularly with the New Deal, is we are changing from a federal republic to a national democracy.
Yeah. And
a national democracy is going to be expressed through the presidency. All these other elections, etc., are sideshows.
And we also get the mandate idea.
Yeah, the mandate. The whole idea of the mandate.
Possible, yeah.
Right, exactly. So you don't elect representatives to discuss. You elect representatives to implement. Politics is replaced by administration. That, I think, is something which is not part of the old American pragmatic system. That is an adaptation of, we're living in a new world. We're living in an industrial, complex world in which, for example, maybe this is self-delusion, but the progressives did not understand themselves to be continuation of Clay and the American system of the 1820s, 1830s, etc. They consider themselves to be new. They consider themselves to be altering the Declaration and the Constitution into living documents.
Yeah, and we see that as well when they do talk about the founding. They talk about it in distinct terms, or as terms that contrast with their own understanding. Woodrow Wilson may be the most.
Well, exactly. In other words, and that has remained with us. Well, if you take a look at, if you were to ask Wilson and the people whom you're referring to, what is wrong with public policy in America, the first thing that I think they would respond to is the American system, which Hoover and others maybe not properly articulating, but sort of instinctively refer to. And at the heart of that is federalism and the separation of powers. So that they're no longer interested in what should government do, which level should do it, and which branch should do it. Government should do it. And the answer is it should be done by administrators. So you read Wilson's work, there is a huge critique of Congress. A huge critique of, what he would love to see is a parliamentary government.
Yeah.
In many ways. So it's sort of a joining of the parliamentary government of Britain with the administrative state of Germany. It's a very European importation, and maybe one of the challenges of the progressives. When Wilson it's fascinating. It's 1887, which is the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Constitution. Wilson gives this address on public administration, in which he says we've been paying too much attention to the Constitution. What we need to do is to drop politics and constitutionalism and focus on good government or administration. This is almost like his the 100th anniversary address.
Yeah, that is an interesting address.
Yeah, it is. It is an address, and which he says. So where does the electorate fit in? Choosing the right administrators. It's no longer choosing the right representatives. It is choosing the right, say, representatives who understand what needs to be done by administrators. So where do the people fit in? Making the right choice of administrators, because politics has been replaced by administration. And this is not just happening in Woodrow Wilson. This is if you read in Europe, that on the right is Bismarck. Bismarck in Germany is arguing that politics is replaced by administration. This is the welfare state, etc. That it is no longer political issues. Engels is arguing that the end of class wars, the end of politics, that politics is replaced by administration. It's a European idea, and where all you have to do is go to college, get a degree, get an advanced degree in administration, public administration, and that you're neutral. You don't have a specific interest that you're going to protect. You're a public servant, and the progressives are very much into that. They criticize very much the Tammany Hall, the interest group politics that takes place. What we need is enlightened administrators, and that and that's appealing to America. It's still appealing to America.
No, it seems another manifestation of this, if we're going to talk about the progressive Constitution and the lack of politics that it allows, competitive politics, is that the new Constitution becomes a collection of milestones that are laid down by these progressive achievements, entitlements, and then, of course, we can talk about how progressivism manifests and changes, and now emphasizes equality and lifestyles and all that. But and you see this, Barack Obama says this very clearly. We're not going back, he says. He has a line, he says, in reference to Obamacare. We're not going to repeal it. And I think part of that, or a huge part of that, is we don't relitigate or discuss again our achievements. We've moved the bar, and we're not going to lower it again. Or and lowering it meaning allowing for discussion and debate. I want to bring in something else here because
why to engage in that is to endorse counter-revolutionary activity,
and and that's to make them feel vulnerable. Yeah, I want to think. I want to think also about the difficulty, it seems, of I guess putting together a coherent philosophy that really challenges the New Deal. That's been there's been thinking about this for a while, and it seems difficult. And one of the reasons I think is the New Deal has largely become the American people, not fully, but Americans. You look at the polling data, accept the entitlements. We seem to accept the bureaucracy and the administrative state. We don't fundamentally question these parts of our government now. And so that's one problem. But the question is, why did it become us? And I want to bring in Alexis de Tocqueville for a second. Many people would say he wrote the greatest book on American democracy. You might disagree with that, Gordon. But Tocqueville, I think, if he were here, he might say the problem isn't government per se. Large government, bureaucratic government, is a symptom of something much deeper, and that is the flattening tendencies of democratic society, which introduces, that I'm an individual, I'm not a person. I don't see myself as connected to a lot of different communities. I start to withdraw into myself, and I start to look at government as something that I can identify with, and I start also to prefer equality. I'm just led to prefer equality over liberty. I still value liberty, but security and those sorts of things become more important to me. And if all of that's true, if that's what democratic society does, and we won't get into all the reasons why Tocqueville thinks that, it's a long argument, but if that's true, then the New Deal kind of becomes us. It's just kind of this process that happens to democratic societies. And if we look throughout the Western world, this seems to be the way it's gone.
Well, I wouldn't. Who am I to disagree with a 30-year-old Frenchman? But no. So I think he's hit it, but he also sees something within the American system that has the potentiality to resist, where perhaps Europe doesn't. It sort of fuels it. Your question is very good indeed. Part of what makes America so attractive to ordinary citizens and immigrants is that it manages to join together what intellectuals, particularly European intellectuals, rend asunder. That we managed to join together certain aspects of the New Deal, but it is not pure socialism. It's not European socialism. The progressives in America would regulate us to death, but they won't own us, except if you don't think there's a difference between owning and regulating. But they can't do that. So I'm not as pessimistic, say, as your comments would suggest. If conservatism means conserving pessimism, what's the point?
Yeah, no, I think, and we get Tocqueville has these resources within American life that are capable of resisting the centralizing trend. But it seems to me I didn't see that really in your book as much. You seem to you mentioned it. But if we look at America right now, it does seem, and Charles Murray, his book Coming Apart seems to be a marker of this, a breakdown of discipline, a breakdown of sturdiness within many Americans, particularly within the working class, who used to be really pillars of American life. A lack of commitment to local institutions. And a willingness to reform them when they're breaking down. And then there's, we can get into attitudinal surveys. There seems to be, within Americans, a lack of optimism, belief in the future. That seems to me something very new in our national experience. So all of these things are working right now, and I keep coming back to Tocqueville when I think about them. And so that's why I wanted to ask you, this sort of part of the problem, which maybe, so it's not just a government thing. There are deep tendencies within democratic society to this sort of consolidation of government.
I think that's a very important question, and my response is that I am tired of hearing exaggerated crises from both sides. Mm-hmm. That the sun still sets and the sun still rises in the morning, and the pier at Malibu is still there. The ocean, Catalina Island, the last time I looked through my window, is still there. The last chapter of our book is mainly written by David. It's a very, very good first couple of pages in which it summarizes the conversation that you and I are having right now. He says one of the one of the authors wanted, after the 2012 election, wanted to go to the safest red state. Yeah. And the other one wanted to continue because he didn't see that anything was, that somebody's going to screw up in politics, that part of the progressive is that they promise the world and they can't deliver it. So they won't. So part of the optimism is they can't deliver on what they're going to say. You don't criticize them for not delivering on what they say. You criticize them for the promise that they make. They can't deliver it. Thank God they can't deliver it. There's some optimism.
I think that's and I think if you look, we look at because your book does kind of deal with the election of 2008 as a milestone. In certain respects, not and you're clear. It's not that 2008 is a definitive election that changes America.
No, exactly. We need to understand.
There is something in 2008 and 2012 that caused a lot of people to wonder where America's going, and really thoughtful, conservative, libertarian intellectuals. I think in 2012, a lot of people scratched their head after that election. But what I think one positive takeaway that I've taken away is Obama and progressives looked back. I think they looked back to Reagan, to 1980, and they saw that kind of like the 1920s. This is false growth, inequality rose, we didn't deal with all these sorts of challenges, and we're going to give you real American success, and that hasn't happened. And I think so what we might say is they had to fail, and we have to see them fail for something good to happen. And so that kind of brings us to where we are. And I think it's we're exhaustion of resources seems evident. There's a loss of spirit in the people. We haven't had real economic growth for a while. We certainly haven't had real job growth.
You're acting like
all these factors
the
are at play.
Conservatives that I'm criticizing.
Yeah.
It's a pessimistic. Why don't we just go? You and Richard, you and I go to the Statue of Liberty. This is what I used to tell our friend George Carey. Why don't we go to the Statue of Liberty and put up a sign, immigrants stay home. It's not because we don't want you here because you're going to corrupt America. We don't want America to corrupt you.
Yeah. Well, what I'm just trying to suggest is it seems that the end of the New Deal, in terms of that mode of government, that conditions for those who are discerning can see that it's failing to deliver. So that's actually a point of optimism, I think.
Well, all right. So now, I think there is a room for optimism. For example, and it may go away now that the market is back, but for about 4 or 5 years, state and local governments were under considerable budget difficulties, and yet they had inherited, through previous actions, huge payments for pensions. That whole issue is being reconsidered, and liberal progressive newspapers are endorsing it to reconsider. The LA Times, for example, is suggesting that we ought to reconsider all these pensions for state and local workers, including firefighters and police officers. We can't afford it. So, and part of the reason why I think they're willing to entertain it in principle is that the many are paying for the few. So that in the area of pensions, for example, there is some reconsideration. I think people have learned that you need to save. I think there's a whole bunch of savings that's going on. People, unfortunately, are not getting much from their savings. People love their children for the most part, and they want their children to go to have education. Maybe they don't understand when the kids are young, but later on, they say, well, what the heck are our students, are our children learning? And you look at the curriculum, and there's a huge critique of education, both at the K through 12 and undergraduate education. Now, where the progressives, I think, have really been successful is they've taken over the education system. That's where the fight is. And I think the optimism is that parents want good education for their children but you're not going to find it in football games. But in an ironic way, the more money that is spent on football and basketball, the less money is spent on corruption. I mean, it's really. I mean, as an academic, I find it atrocious that I mean, I can open tomorrow, Saturday's paper, and you look at the sports section, and you say, look at all this basketball games. Look at these. They're all college. What the heck are we doing? You didn't give them lists of college courses that are given. There's college football, college basketball. And I think, my gosh, that's not what colleges should be doing. But think about it. Most of those people aren't radicals. Those people, so there's a strange hope that so that I don't know what one can do with the colleges. One thing is the Department of the schools of education aren't helping, and yet there are a whole bunch of teachers out there who are very interested in content.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
So that. One of the things I think that was done fairly well over the Clinton-Bush years was an interest in content through National Endowment for Humanities and Department of Education involving civic education, and it produced various programs like Teaching American History, and it got teachers to understand text and look at content. Well, the first thing, as I understand it, I have no reason to doubt the people who have told me this, is that as soon as the Obama administration came in, they call all these groups, Bill of Rights Institute, et cetera, come in, we'll tell you our philosophy. It's no longer to be engaged in civic education and these courses. It's to stop bullying in high schools. It's to stop bullying and insensitivity in universities. All right. Now, if you get a different administration, maybe they can stop that nonsense. I say it's nonsense because that's not what schools are created to do, to stop bullying. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I think it's not that I'm thoroughly pessimistic. It's that there are certain points in this system where if it's properly reinforced. Look, I am amazed that people who are interested in the kinds of things that you and I are interested in and have money will rather pour millions of dollars into a red state to elect somebody who's also going to be elected, but wouldn't put a dime into education. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there is money out there that the private sector can devote to proper causes to substantiate. To encourage civic education. Look, for me, right now, one of the critical distinctions is between civic education and civic engagement. The progressives are very interested in civic engagement. That is, as long as you go to some Occupy Wall Street or you go to some kind of field trip and see things and do this and touch it and whatever, and you go to that horrible site in Philadelphia, the president's house, that somehow you are being engaged civically. I'm interested in civic education, and that is getting to know the framers, getting to know the American system, getting to know the conversation, getting to know all of these things, getting to know that was a debate between Hoover and Roosevelt, getting to know those things because, well, I mean, that's important. It's education that's important. I think the number one thing that should be taking place is why have the progressives been permitted to take over the education system?
Gordon, maybe on that question we can end. It's a great question, and
we're just getting interesting.
And well, no, you've been interesting this entire time. The book is The New Deal in Modern American Conservatism, A Defining Rivalry. We've been talking with one of the authors, Gordon Lloyd, co-authored with David Davenport. Gordon, thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Thank you so much for your interesting questions and your enduring and defining friendship.
All right. Thank you, Gordon. This is your host, Richard Reinsch, and you have been listening to a podcast that can be found at libertylawtalk.org, where you can subscribe, comment, find other episodes, and links relevant to today's conversation. Our email address is mail@libertylawtalk.org.